Welcome back to part 2 of lecture 4. In part 2 of this 3-part video set, we're going to learn about the 12 leads of the standard clinical EKG, and we're going to explore why so many different leads are necessary. But before we do that, let's review how a cardiac vector would appear in different leads. How would this vector appear in lead 2 of the EKG? Lead 2, the positive pole, is located toward the left hip. Would it be a positive deflection or a negative deflection? Well, the vector is pointed toward the positive pole, so it would be a positive deflection, and the vector is well aligned with the lead axis of lead 2. So we would see a large positive deflection on the EKG. How about this one? This vector is angled a little bit away from parallel on lead 2, so we would see a smaller deflection. Still positive, still pointed toward the positive pole of the lead axis. How about this one? Well, this vector happens to be almost perpendicular to the lead axis, still a little bit positive, so we see a very small positive deflection. And finally, this vector is pointed away from the positive pole, more toward the negative pole, so we would see a negative deflection. And finally, what would this vector be? Recall, the convention is that the vector always points to the region of net positivity. So the vector would be pointed like this. This vector is pointed away from the positive pole toward the negative pole, and so it would be a fairly large negative deflection. Okay, very good. How about the same vector? How would the same vector appear in different limb leads? Let's first consider lead 1. Lead 1, the positive pole, is on the left shoulder. How would this vector appear to lead 1? Well, it would be positive deflection, wouldn't it? Yes. How would this same vector appear in lead 2? Would it be larger or smaller? It would be larger because this vector is oriented a little bit more parallel in line with the lead axis of lead 2. And finally, how would this same vector appear in lead 3? Positive pole down toward the apex, negative pole up at the left shoulder. Is the vector pointed toward the positive electrode? Yes, it is, a little bit. So it would be a small positive deflection. Okay, very good. Remember our old friend Willem Einthoven. Einthoven recognized that the shifting cardiac vector could be recorded if 3 sets of electrodes were placed across the chest in the form of a triangle. That's called Einthoven's triangle. That way, the vector, the shifting cardiac vector, could be viewed from all sides of the heart. And the system of 3 leads that he proposed are, in fact, still used today. They are called the limb leads. Okay? Lead 1 records the potential between the right arm and the left arm, with the left arm designated as positive. Okay? Lead 2 records the potential between the right arm and the left foot, or the left leg, with the left leg designated as positive. And finally, lead 3 records the potential between the left arm and the left foot, with the left foot positive. So the 3 leads of the 3 limb leads form a triangle over the chest called Einthoven's triangle. Now, does it matter if the electrodes are placed on the distal ends of the limbs, the hands and feet, as opposed to the proximal portion of the limbs near the trunk? No, it does not. That's because the limbs are filled with an extracellular fluid and electrolyte that conducts electricity very well. There's very little resistance between this portion of the right arm and the end of the right arm. So by moving the electrode in toward the trunk really doesn't make any difference on the recording of the EKG. You can try that yourself when you record an EKG on yourself. So here is Einthoven, and he has his hands and feet in jars of an electrolyte, salty electrolyte solution. Nowadays, we don't use jars of electrolyte. We use disposable electrodes, which have a self-adhesive pad that has a silver chloride conducting gel that conducts between the electrode itself and the surface of the skin. And not only have we come a long way in the development of electrodes, but the EKG machines themselves now are far more modern, and they even have built-in algorithms that can analyze the waveform and predict pathologies. And you can even record an EKG on your iPhone now. So back in 1942, a guy named Emanuel Goldberger realized that the heart could be viewed from 3 additional perspectives using the same set of electrodes, simply by connecting the limb leads together in pairs. And he called these new configurations the augmented limb leads. They include AVR, whose positive pole is the right arm. Notice that the other 2 electrodes are electrically connected. So this is the vector, the lead axis of the AVR. The second augmented limb lead is AVL. L stands for left arm, which is the positive pole. And the third and final augmented limb lead is AVF, F standing for foot. By the way, the abbreviation of AV stands for augmented voltage because Goldberger had to augment the gain on the EKG machine in order to record the same amplitude as the corresponding limb leads. And nowadays, EKG machines automatically generate the augmented lead recordings by simply electronically connecting the limb leads together in pairs stepwise. No additional electrodes are required. About 8 years earlier, in 1934, a guy named Frank Wilson said, gee, the limb leads view the heart from the frontal plane, the vertical plane. Wouldn't it be great if we could also record the electrical events in the horizontal plane? So he proposed placing a second set of 6 leads over the chest, and he called these the precordial leads. Makes sense, the word precordium refers to the area of the chest overlying the heart. So the positive electrode is placed at one of 6 different positions along the chest wall, and the other electrodes are connected together. So this gives us leads V1 through V6, and they record the electrical vector in the horizontal plane. And by the way, V stands for vector. They all record in the horizontal plane, whereas the augmented limb leads and the limb leads record in the vertical plane. Now, this is not going to be on your exam, but I just include this so that you have a better idea of where these precordial leads, V1 through 6, are placed. They're all put in a very standard position, set of positions along the chest wall, and they view different territories of the heart. We'll get into that later. Okay, to summarize, the standard clinical EKG uses 12 leads to record the same electrical events in the heart from 12 different vantage points. We have limb leads 1 through 3, AVR, AVL, and AVF in the vertical plane, and in the horizontal plane we have the precordial leads V1 through V6, and that sums up to 12 limb leads. Why so many electrodes? Well, if I were to purchase a car sight unseen on eBay, let's say it's this car here, unlikely because I would never buy a car like this, but if I was, I would want to see it from all sides, wouldn't I? If the owner posted a picture of the car only from this side, I wouldn't trust it. What if the car is all banged up on each side or caved in on the rear? I wouldn't trust it. I would want to see many different perspectives on this car so that I can get an idea of the shape of the car as a whole. And that's why we have so many electrodes. The reason is we can view the heart from 12 different vantage points because each pair of electrodes provides a different perspective on the shifting cardiac vector over the course of the cardiac cycle. And recall, because the lead axis records the cardiac vector best when it is perfectly parallel to the lead axis, the regional events will show up best in certain leads, right? Because they are going to be more or less aligned with the cardiac vector at that point in time. So, inspection of all 12 leads therefore provides information on the location of the electrical events in the heart. If there is a conduction defect or an arrhythmia arising from a certain territory of the heart, we can inspect the different leads and evaluate which leads the anomaly shows up best in, and that can give us information about the site of a conduction block or an arrhythmia. So here is a standard 12-lead EKG recording. This one happens to be from Kaiser Permanente, and it happens to be my own EKG. I think I'm normal. And I just wanted to show you that the standard presentation of the 12 leads is in the following format. The limb leads 1 through 3 is always presented in the top left corner. for 2.5 second run. Here are the augmented limb leads in purple, AVR, AVL, AVF, another 2.5 second run. And then finally we have the 6 precordial leads, V1 through V6 on the right side. And then there is always a standard 10-second extended recording along the bottom to see the consistency of electrical events over 10 to 15 cardiac cycles. So what do you think this is, the PRT axis? Well, let's begin to consider it. The axis of the heart, the electrical axis of the heart, or the cardiac axis, sometimes called the mean QRS axis, represents the electrical vector of the heart during the peak of ventricular excitation. So that would be during the QRS complex, which we'll talk about later. And this is evaluated with a radial coordinate diagram. Simply plots the axes for the 6 limb leads, and by convention the direction of the left arm is taken as 0, and the coordinates are positive reading clockwise. So we go 0, 30, 60, 90, 120, and then we go minus 30, minus 60, minus 91, minus 120. So the radial coordinate diagram is used to assess what cardiologists call the electrical axis of the heart. And in healthy people, it is somewhere between minus 29 and plus 105. And so the axis in most healthy people usually points to the left hip. And when you do your own EKG recording, you are going to be measuring your own electrical axis. So just a recap, which lead would this iPhone CardioMobile device, which you can buy now as an accessory to your iPhone, here are a pair of electrodes that you put your fingers on, which lead would this record? Well, lead 2, right? And you see a pretty good recording. All right, that concludes part 2, short video. Come on back after a short break for part 3.